So I was in a quarterly planning session last week, one of those meetings that really could have been an email. And we spent probably 2 hours debating strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I listened, the more I realized we weren't talking about strategy at all. We were talking about ambition.
Oh, yeah. I know those meetings.
Right. People were saying things like, our strategy is to be the #1 provider in the region, or our strategy is to crush the competition.
Which is great energy. It's good motivation, but that's not a strategy. It's a wish
It's a
list.
wish list. Exactly. And it reminded me of that old quote, hope is not a strategy. But it feels like in the corporate world, we've diluted the word to mean, well, anything important that we want to do.
It's become a catch-all term for trying really hard.
Yes.
And that conflation is actually dangerous. I mean, if
Yeah.
you confuse ambition with strategy, you end up with disasters. And I'm not using that word lightly. If we look back in history, specifically the Battle of Passchendaele in World War I, we see what happens when crying hard is just substituted for competent strategy.
Oh, this is the example from Richard Rumelt's work, isn't it? The whole
Yeah.
one last push mentality.
Exactly. You had the British command. They were facing a stalemate. And the strategy, if you can even call it that, was just to throw more bodies at the problem. The soldiers were incredibly motivated. They were brave. They didn't lack culture or drive, but they were slaughtered in the mud because the leadership failed to diagnose the structural impossibility of the situation. They were, in effect, relying on willpower to overcome machine guns.
That's a grim start,
Yeah.
but it perfectly frames what we're trying to do today. We're going to rescue the concept of strategy from that buzzword bin.
Right.
We're pulling from the heavy hitters, Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Michael Porter, Richard Rumelt, to figure out what strategy actually is.
And how to build one that isn't just fluff.
And how to spot a bad one before it, kills your project.
Yeah. And we're going to look at why even the smartest companies get this so wrong. Because it's usually not a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of honesty about the problem they're actually trying to solve.
So let's go back to the source code. The word strategos comes from the Greek for army leader.
Mhm.
But the two biggest pillars of strategic thought, they come from very different sides of the globe. You've got the Eastern approach with Sun Tzu and the Western approach with Karl von Clausewitz.
Right.
And they offer two very, very different flavors of how to view conflict. Sun Tzu, writing The Art of War around 500 BC, is all about the indirect approach. He famously said, "The acme of skill is to subdue the enemy without fighting."
Which always sounds a bit paradoxical coming from a general, doesn't it? I'm here to lead the army, but my best move is not using it.
Well, think of it like water. Sun Tzu used that metaphor constantly.
Water avoids the heights and it flows to the lowlands. It has no constant shape. A Sun Tzu strategist looks at the enemy, finds the gap, the psychological weakness or the unguarded flank, and just flows right through it. It's all about deception and intelligence.
It reminds me of the game Go.
Yeah.
You aren't. You're not trying to punch the other player in the face. You're just placing stones on the board to surround them until they realize 10 moves later that they've already lost.
That is a perfect analogy. It's a game of territory and influence. Now, contrast that with the Western heavyweight, Karl von Clausewitz, writing in the 19th century.
Okay.
If Sun Tzu is Go, Clausewitz it's chess. Or maybe even boxing.
War is the continuation of politics by other means.
That's the famous line. But his tactical philosophy was about finding the center of gravity. He believed you have to identify the source of the enemy's power.
Their army, their capital.
Their army, their capital city, their will to fight, and you smash it with overwhelming force. It's much more direct. It acknowledges friction, the chaos of reality, but the solution is almost always decisive action against the main body.
So we have these two lineages, the indirect sort of water-like deception of the East and the direct center of gravity crushing of the West. But here's the bridge I always struggle with. How did we get from destroying the enemy's will to selling more SaaS subscriptions? Why do we even use military terminology in business?
It's not an accident. If you look at the rise of the modern corporation in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, the railroad boom, the steel giant, the people running these massive organizations were often former military men.
Oh,
It was the only model they had for managing thousands of people. That's why we have divisions, officers, campaigns, and, front lines.
we literally organized our companies like armies.
He did, but the philosophy had to evolve because unlike war, business isn't a zero-sum game of destruction.
You can't just bomb your competitor's headquarters.
Yeah, not legally anyway. Business is about competition and coexistence, and that requires a blend of both Sun Tzu and Clausewitz. You need the direct force for execution, but you also need that indirect maneuvering to find a market niche where nobody is fighting you.
Okay, so if we aren't bombing headquarters, what is the definition of business strategy? Because we established that growing by 20%,
Right.
that isn't it.
Right. Growing by 20% is a goal. It's a destination. A strategy is the bridge that gets you there. Richard Rumelt wrote Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which I think is the definitive text on this. He argues that most corporate strategies are just fluff, just buzzwords strung together.
We will be the best-in-class provider of customer-centric solutions.
Exactly. That means absolutely nothing. Rumelt says a good strategy, what he calls the kernel, must have 3 specific components.
Okay,
If you are missing even one of them, you don't have a strategy.
so walk us through the kernel.
Part 1 is the diagnosis, and this is where most companies fail immediately. You have to define the challenge. What is actually holding us back? And it has to be honest. You can't just say sales are down. You have to say sales are down because our product is outdated and our competitors are cheaper.
That's the uncomfortable part, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's admitting the baby is ugly.
It is, but without a diagnosis, you can't prescribe a cure. Part 2 is the guiding policy. This is the overall approach for dealing with the diagnosis. It's the guardrails. So, for example, we are going to shift from a hardware sales model to a subscription service model.
And part 3.
Coherent action. And coherent is the key word there. You need a set of specific steps that all reinforce each other.
So you can't have a policy of premium luxury service and then.
And then an action plan that involves cutting staff and buying cheap materials, that's incoherent. The actions have to align with the policy, which has to solve the diagnosis.
This all sounds very structured, very top-down. But Henry Mintzberg, he kind of threw a wrench in this, didn't he? He argued that you can't always just plan this stuff out in a boardroom.
Mintzberg is the champion of emergent strategy. He introduced the 5 Ps. Everyone knows strategy is a plan, but he also said it can be a pattern.
This is the idea that strategy can happen by accident, or at least by observation.
Think of it like a path in the woods. The planning school of thought says you look at a map, you draw a line, and you pave a road before you even step outside.
Okay.
Mintzberg says sometimes you just start walking. You try things. You notice that every time you head west, you hit a swamp, but when you head east, you find dry ground. Over time, a pattern emerges. We go east.
So the strategy isn't, we plan to go east. It's, we look back and realize we were succeeding in the east, so let's just do more of that.
Precisely. In a complex world, sometimes you can't diagnose the problem until you've already started interacting with it. Smart companies allow for that. They have a plan, but they are willing to let a pattern override that plan if the pattern is working.
Okay, let's take this from the abstract to the concrete. We have our definition. But in a massive organization, strategy isn't just one sticky note. It's an entire architecture. The sources describe it as a hierarchy. You've got corporate, business, functional, and operational.
And this hierarchy is where strategy lives or dies. If the levels don't talk to each other, you just get chaos.
Let's trace this with a real example. Let's look at Microsoft. A few years ago, they decide to acquire Activision Blizzard. That's level 1. Corporate strategy, the trunk, right? It answers the question, where do we compete? They decided we are competing in gaming content, not just software.
Exactly. The corporate level is about the whole portfolio, but then you go down to level 2, business strategy. This answers, how do we win in this market? For Microsoft's gaming division, Xbox, the strategy shifted from sell more consoles to sell Game Pass subscriptions. That's a fundamental shift.
So corporate says buy Activision, business says put Call of Duty on Game Pass. Now we hit level 3, functional strategy. This is HR, finance, marketing.
And this is where the friction starts. If your business strategy is Game Pass, which is all about recurring content and cloud streaming, your HR functional strategy needs to be hire cloud infrastructure engineers and live service monetization experts.
Right.
If HR is still hiring people who only know how to ship physical discs to Best Buy, your strategy is completely broken.
And finally, you have level 4, operational strategy, the roots, the daily grind.
This is the most critical disconnect. Imagine you're a customer support agent for Xbox. If the corporate strategy is customer retention for Game Pass, but your operational incentive is keep calls under 2 minutes.
Oh, you're going to rush people off the phone.
Every single time, you are actively undermining the strategy because the operational metrics don't align with the corporate vision.
That's the classic execution gap. The CEO says quality first, but the factory manager gets a bonus for speed.
And the factory manager will choose speed every time. That's why Remote's coherent action is so hard. It requires aligning the bonus structure of the guy on the floor with the vision of the guy in the boardroom.
Let's pivot to the toolkit.
Yeah.
Say I've got my alignment, I've got my diagnosis. How do I analyze the battlefield? We all learn Michael Porter's 5 forces in business school, but I feel like people just use it as a checklist. Rivalry? Check. Suppliers? Check.
They do, and it drives me crazy. The power of Porter isn't identifying the forces, it's identifying which one is going to kill you. Everyone focuses on rivalry, Coke versus Pepsi.
Right.
But usually the real danger comes from substitutes or buyers.
Let's drill into substitutes.
Yeah.
Because people often confuse a rival with a substitute.
A rival does what you do. The substitute does something different that solves the same problem.
Okay.
So the classic example is the airline industry. A rival to United is American Airlines, but a substitute for United is a Zoom call.
Or a high-speed train.
Exactly. If technology makes video conferencing 100% lifelike, business travel collapses. Not because of a better airline, but because of a substitute.
Look at Netflix and Blockbuster.
Perfect example. Netflix wasn't just another rival video store. They substituted the entire logistics of entertainment. First via mail, then via streaming.
And Blockbuster was so focused on the rivalry fighting other rental chains, they completely missed the substitute.
They also missed the internal rot, which brings us to the VRIO framework. This is for analyzing your internal strengths. Is your resource valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized?
I feel like the organized part is where all the bodies are buried.
Always. You can have a valuable, rare technology, but if you aren't organized to exploit it, it's worthless. Look at Xerox PRC. They invented the graphical user interface. The mouse, windows, icons.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. It was valuable and rare. But Xerox was a copier company. They weren't organized to bring a computer interface to market. They let Steve Jobs and Apple walk in, see it, and monetize it. Apple was organized. Xerox wasn't.
That transitions perfectly to the idea of pivot or perish. Xerox couldn't pivot. Kodak couldn't pivot. We always hear about Kodak refusing to go digital, but the story is actually much worse than that.
Oh, it's much worse. Kodak invented the digital camera in 1975.
No way.
Yes. The engineer, Steve Sasson, he showed it to management. But Kodak's entire empire was built on selling chemical film and paper. They called it the silver halide strategy. They diagnosed the digital camera not as an opportunity, but as a threat to their chemical margins.
They protected the solution, which was film, instead of the problem, which was capturing memories.
And then that is the trap. Bad strategy often comes from holding on to a legacy revenue model. Now, compare that to Slack.
I love the Slack story. They were a gaming company, right? Tiny speck.
Yes, building a game called Glitch. And the game was okay, but it wasn't a hit. They were burning through cash. But they noticed that the internal chat tool they had hacked together to let their developers talk to each other was actually fantastic.
This is the Mintzberg pattern again. They saw a signal in the noise.
They did. But here's the strategic courage. They shut down the game, they fired people, they killed their darling to pivot entirely to the chat tool. That is the definition of strategy. It's about making choices. Strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. Kodak couldn't stop doing film. Slack stopped doing games.
So we've looked at the history, the definitions, the failures.
Yeah.
But we're recording this for a 2026 audience.
Oh.
And the landscape is shifting again. We aren't just dealing with competitors and substitutes. We're dealing with agentic AI.
This is the massive unlock that's happening right now. For the last century, strategy was a human activity. We gather data, we diagnose, we plan. But agentic AI, these autonomous agents, can now run that loop continuously.
So instead of a strategic plan that sits in a binder for 5 years, you have a system that is constantly diagnosing.
Exactly. Imagine an AI that watches your supply chain, your competitors' pricing, and the weather in Brazil, and it real-time adjusts your inventory strategy. We are moving from static strategy to dynamic strategy.
But does that make the human strategist obsolete? I mean, if the AI can play the game of Go better than we can, and business is just complicated Go.
I don't think so. I think it moves the human up the value chain. The AI can handle navigation, finding the best route, but the human still has to define the destination.
I see.
The AI can tell you how to win the market, but it can't tell you which market matters to you. It can't determine the values or the ultimate mission of the organization.
It can solve the puzzle, but we have to choose the puzzle.
Precisely. And this loops all the way back to Rumelt. The diagnosis is going to be easier with AI. The action will be automated. But the guiding policy, the philosophy of how we want to win, that stays human.
That's a really powerful place to land. We started with soldiers in the mud of Passchendaele, and we've ended up with AI agents in the cloud. But the core thread remains the same. Whether you're a general or a CEO, you have to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be.
And you have to have the courage to focus your resources. You cannot be strong everywhere. You must choose where to win.
So here is our final thought for you to chew on. We talked about Rumelt's kernel diagnosis, policy, action. If you are looking at your own company, or even your own career strategy right now, ask yourself this. Are you solving the root cause? Or are you just treating a symptom because the symptom is easier to measure?
Usually, if the diagnosis doesn't make you at least a little uncomfortable, you probably haven't gone deep enough.
On that note, thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.